Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Good Kind of Scary. So it is the 10th of December. It's getting close to Christmas and close to the end of the year. I'm heading away to Italy next week with my mom. We'll be gone for the Christmas break. So I said it was time to do a little review of all the books that I've read this year. And so I've got a stack of books over here. If you're watching this in video, you'll see some books. And then I also have a list done out because some books I took out from the library, some are audio books. So today I'm going to go through some of my top recommended reads from this year. I'm going to chat about books that I enjoyed, learned different things from, ones that maybe I didn't get as much as I thought I would from, or I didn't enjoy as much. Yeah, and just have a chat about all the different books. So, first of all, I'm going to list out, I was really impressed. So, like, I have a Goodreads and I just abandoned it this year. I think I used it last year, don't remember, but this year, I've definitely read more books than any other year before. And I wasn't necessarily keeping track. I just had to do this list up before I started. And I still feel like I'm missing a book. So it's a weird feeling, but I got into a habit of reading a lot more this year or listening to audiobooks. So I'm going to list out, and this could also drive some people crazy who are like, I can only read one book at a time and I have to read it start to finish because I am the type of person who could be reading six books at once, if not more. And some it might take me a year to finish, and others I might finish in one day. And I sometimes like dipping in and out of different books and having a variety. So I have 18 books that I finished this year and that I've read. There's one book that is like a daily meditations book that I've like been dipping in and out of. So, and it's not, I got it in August, so I can't really say that I've finished that, but it's a book that I'll mention. I have three books that I'm almost finished, so I'll definitely have 21 books by the end of this year. And not that it's about counting, but yeah, I wanted to do this podcast now. Um, yeah, because it is approaching the end of the year. And I have seven books that I have put aside or like that I'm taking my time with, in that I had to put a pause on them for a reason. Either like it might have felt too much, or yeah, there's just sometimes like I remember Donal Ryan, who I had on the podcast before, an incredible author, and I was lucky to have him as a lecturer. I remember he said to me before, like, life is too short to, continue reading a book that you're not enjoying. And I sometimes remember that when I'm trying to force myself to complete a book. And I guess this is a good place to start. So there is this book called The Secret History by Donna Tartt, and it's actually quite a long book. So that's the other thing that can really influence the motivation to keep reading. Yeah, it's like nearly 700 pages. And I had a friend recommend this to me when I worked in a bookshop in Perth. So I bought it when I was there, brought it back home to Ireland with me. I started reading it, I don't know, a year or more ago, like not this year, but the year before. And I was getting really into it, and I thought like the style of writing was great, the characters were interesting. But as time went on, I just felt like the plot was being dragged out, and I got to a point where I actually didn't even really care about any of the characters anymore. I went from like being intrigued about everyone, and there's all this, it's a sort of, there's like a mysterious plot, there's a murder, and there's a lot of strange things happening in the book. So yeah, I can imagine this as a movie. Maybe it is a movie. Um, and that would be, when like, oh, it's just 2 hours. I want to know what happens. I felt like there was a lot of parts dragged out. And even though I think like you could get inside the narrator's head really easily, and the writing was done well in that, there were some lines and I was like, oh, that's a really lovely sentence, or the way that the dialogue was done, I felt like it flowed easy, but like I just found after the first like 200 pages, I was kind of losing interest. So I had stopped reading it for ages. And there was a storm at the start of this year in January, actually, which is nearly a year ago now. It's mad. But if you're in Ireland, you might remember there was like a blackout in that a load, like for us anyway, our electricity was gone for over a week. And so me and mom were just reading books with like the candle lit. And I decided I was gonna start a new book. And there was that part in my head, like my inner critic was just like, oh no, you should finish that book that you started. Like start what you finish, go back to that book. Um, and so like then I was like, fine, but there's a part of me that was really like, at least I was like, at least I'll get to see how it ends. But I didn't, I felt like it was nearly became a chore as I was pushing through it. And don't get me wrong, there's some really interesting things in the book, but I think it's because my friend loved it so much and he was like, oh, you have to read this. Um, but yeah, I just, when I got to the ending, I was a bit like, oh, I think I would have been all right if I never, like, if I decided to stop at the 200 pages and never went back to it. I just realized I was like, oh, there was something that made me feel weird about this, the plot and some of the characters. There's a lot of disturbing parts to it too. So I guess that's a good question for you to consider. It's like if you really are getting that feeling of like, oh, I don't know, I just can't really be bothered with this book, or it's not something I'm enjoying. It's like, do you have to push yourself through? Or can you go to another book and say, oh, I might come back to that, or just decide to let it go? Because I think some of us, if we do have that personality, and I don't know if it is a personality thing, but maybe it's just a guilt thing of, oh, I have to finish it. It blocks us from like enjoying reading. And like, I've just completely, I used to be like shame myself for sometimes reading a load of books at once and not fully finishing any of them. But I'm like, well, isn't it great that I can like dip in and out and I can remember what happened before? So I'm seeing my need of variety. It could be a love of variety, it could be ADHD, whatever it is. I'm seeing it as a positive thing in this sense that I like reading a few different things at once. So another example of a book that is highly recommended is The Kite Runner. And so this book, The Kite Runner, um, I'd say a lot of people know it. It's by Khaled Hosseini. Um, and so, yeah, it was a book that I got in. We have one of those little, what do you call them? It's like you leave a book and then you take a book thingies down by where I do my sea dips. And so I was delighted to see this book. And I started reading it. I started reading it in January. And it was a book I couldn't put down, really beautiful, really poignant. I think there's such power in showing like the world around you through the eyes of a kid, and the culture. And so like this one especially, it starts off, there's like two friends and they're both from different classes, I guess you could say. And because of that, one of them is looked down on more in their society. And it's based in Afghanistan in 1970. So there's a lot going on. And I think, novels are such a great way, and through the eyes of kids, to really show and like show the heartbreak of what's going on in a place. I had to stop reading, and not that I had to, I decided to, and it was close to, it was around page 70. Um, and that's not that far in, like there's 300 pages. Um, and I do want to go back to it, but I was actually getting upset. I was crying lots. And I can't give away a spoiler, but there was just a really sad scene to do with the two kids, and it just made me feel really upset and it broke my heart. And I just thought, like, I nearly was dreading going back to it because I was like, I just can't handle this right now, especially with everything that was going on in the world, that is going on in the world, and seeing, footage online of children in Gaza. Um, I was just like, my heart, it's so powerful, books like this, and it's so important, and I do want to, and I will go back to it. But I'm just honestly sharing, like, once again, I had to put it down, and then it was there being like, oh, I should finish this one before starting another. And I was like, no, Saoirse, go back to it when you're in a better space, and then you'll appreciate it more. Um, yeah, and I think it's being aware of that with what we're consuming and what we're reading too. Um, that sometimes, especially when the world feels like a lot, there are times where we need like escapes, and there are times where we need to educate ourselves more. And there's different books that are for different purposes. And I think it also depends what you're going through in your life, like what book will resonate with you and be right for you. And so yeah, that is another book. That's one I had to put down, that I will go back to. But what I want to chat a bit about is some of my favorite books from this year, and the ones that I couldn't put down that I was like losing myself in. Um, and before I do that, also, it's really important for me to say, for anyone who doesn't listen to the podcast, you might not know, or if you haven't listened to other episodes, this year I've done a breathwork facilitation training. It started in February and it was 6 months, and it was literally like a deep dive into the nervous system. I had daily breathing practices. It was looking at emotions, shadow work. Um, I was doing it in a community setting online. So there was a lot of like being triggered by other people and learning how to be okay with myself in community settings. And also there was studying facilitation skills. I had a few months then of doing breathwork. I had 24 case studies with groups and one-to-ones. And also I had to read 6 different books related to breathwork or the nervous system or the mind-body connection. So that's another reason, I guess, that like some of those books took the front seat over others, because I had to really focus with them and get them done and write up book reports. So I do have book reports here for those, and I can always read a little bit of them. But yeah, it's worth mentioning that. And it was funny because it's like sometimes I don't like being told like what I have to read. And it's interesting that like when someone tells me I have to read or watch something, and especially with the books, there were some books that like I nearly found myself procrastinating from those books, and I would start a different book. And I think maybe that's why I read so many books this year. I was just like reading the ones on the list, which were, really most of them, well, all of them taught me something, and were really impactful. And there was a few which are in my list of favorites, and that were also really eye-opening, really engaging, shifted the way I was looking at the world and my body. And there were some that were really confronting that nearly felt like too much. So I had to nearly balance some of those books with light-hearted reads, and I'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, I'll start out, I guess, with sharing some of my favorite ones that I read for my book reports on the breathwork course. So, first of all, this is my mentor from the journey of the breathwork training I did, Pat Divilly, and this was his book, and so I chose this as one of my books to read. We did have a long list of different choices and ones we could choose from. Um, but yeah, like signing up to his breathwork course was, yeah, the best decision, one of the best decisions I've ever made, and definitely I would say, the best decision of this year. It's just been life-changing. And yeah, the book, Shadow Work, it says it's a practical guide to embracing your shadow side, tackling shame, and transforming pain into power. So I would have read that earlier this year. And for those of you who don't know shadow work, it's based off of Carl Jung's theories. He talks about how, and it's Pat speaks about this in his book, um, how our shadow self, and all is this idea that like there are parts of us that we hide from the world. Like we have our persona, we have parts of us that we show the world, and there are other parts of us that we hide. Some are repressed and shamed from childhood because we were taught that it wasn't safe to be a certain way, which is like heartbreaking. And this is what I learned through breath work. Like the idea of breath work is like we are breathing deep into our nervous system. And if, yeah, many of us, we might have had times throughout our life where we held our breath, we held back emotion, we didn't want people to see us crying. We were told like girls don't get angry, so we, instead of like expressing our anger and our boundaries, we like held and like tensed up. And the idea is like the body holds a lot of what's repressed. And so the shadow self are the parts of us that we learned were unlovable, that were either too much, that weren't acceptable. So that could be the part that shows anger, the part that speaks up for themselves, and the part who loved to create, who loved to sing. And we may have learned these things aren't acceptable, they're cringe, so we shut them off. And shadow work is learning how do we bring them back to life? How do we integrate them in to our life and learn to love those parts of us and know that they're acceptable? And, you know, what I loved in this book, like Pat gives different steps. He gives like breathwork suggestions. He gives different like practical steps you can take, journaling prompts. It's very much like a really helpful guide you can use. And then he also goes into his personal experience. And he talks about this idea of like our golden shadow, which is that yes, sometimes the parts of us we learned to shame and that we hid, it's because we don't like them. And there are some parts of ourselves that we are embarrassed about, we don't want to associate with us. But the golden shadow is this idea that some of those parts could be where our gold is. So let's say you decided to hide your love of speaking out and expressing yourself, and because that didn't feel safe, you were taught that it's selfish, that it's too much. Actually, maybe there's gold in there. Maybe from you learning to do that, you're on a path that feels more like you. So it's like learning to love the parts of us that were rejected, that either we rejected, society told us was bad, or other people. And how do we bring those in back into our life with loving kindness? So that's one book that I would highly recommend, Shadow Work by Pat Divilly. Um, a book that I absolutely loved that I only like got by chance is Untamed by Glennon Doyle. I just love the cover. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see like, oh, it's just so colorful. And so this was a book therapy book for me in that I was feeling really crap one day. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to buy a book. I'm going to go into the bookshop. And I had a list of a few different books that I had taken note of that I heard were good or ones that I was interested in. So I just walked into a bookshop in town. And whenever I'm in these moods, sometimes this has happened before where I go into a bookshop and I'm like, do you have this book? And they're just like, no, but you could order it online. And then I'm just like defeated because sometimes it's like, you know, if you go and buy chocolate or something, you just want an immediate hit. And I might not even read the book that day, but it's like just the dopamine hit of buying it and knowing I have it. But I know that I will read it, and it's like I'm nearly buying a friend, because books are really comforting too, and I always know that I'll learn something from it, so I feel really good about myself when I buy books on a day that I feel crap. So they didn't have the book that I needed. And I was like, oh, they were like, do you want to order it? And I was like, no, no, it's grand. I'll just have a look around. And I saw this book, Untamed by Glennon Doyle, and it said, Stop pleasing, start living. I know it's like you shouldn't judge a book by a cover, but really, I liked its cover. And I went up and then asked them about it, and I was about to buy it, and I was like, I should actually read what it's about, or I should Google this person. Because I was like, who even is Glennon Doyle? So I Googled her and I saw some things that I could resonate with. I saw like Brene Brown had left a review, and Elizabeth Gilbert, both whose books I'd read and work I've admired. So I just said, like, fuck it, I'll get it. So I got Untamed. Best, I would say, yeah, my favorite book of this year. It's easy to say that when I've just read it, but I've read so many different good books this year. But this one just like spoke to me, and I just didn't want to put it down. And I think she's such a champion for women. Um, and I think like hearing her advocate for herself and for her daughters, and also for like people in marginalized groups. She talks about how, yeah, there's just so many great things in it. She talks about addiction and becoming sober. She talks about her decision to leave her marriage with her husband to then um, for a woman, and talks about how the fears around that affecting her career, about becoming an advocate for marginalized groups. Yeah, like, and learning more about like racism, and just like I even like see her online, she's speaking out for Palestine. And I just think like there's a really like brave, bold side to her that I admire so much. And it's this idea, she really always talks about how like each day is like a new day, and we're always learning in life, and knowing that like, you're not tied to your beliefs, but every day is a new chance to learn. And I love how like her life in itself, her story shows that. Like she had this successful business and what looked like the picture perfect marriage, but there were so many cracks underneath it all. And then she, made the decision to be open about that, honest about that. She comes from a religious family, and she still has strong faith, believing in God, but she doesn't believe in like a lot of the brainwashing ways that religion's taught. And yeah, explores all of this in the book in a way that feels real and honest. She speaks openly about being sensitive, being creative, and I just loved it, to be honest. I think a big theme in it is like feeling all of the feelings and being okay with being disliked. I mean, it says stop pleasing, start living, being untamed. And she even openly talks about how sometimes she dislikes women, and has in the past noticed she's triggered by women who love themselves and who are filled with joy. And she realized we all are, and we love women who suffer more than we love women who are joyful and who love life. And so she's been leaning more into being joyful and loving life. And I'd say I underlined nearly every word in this book. And it's been a big motivation. I may have mentioned it in my last podcast episode. It's been a massive motivation for me to start my online creative community for women. It was just like everything makes sense. Like I felt like I was supposed to find this book. It was one that was nearly sent to me. I'm quite spiritual. I nearly feel like I went in that day. They didn't have the book that I wanted, and I ended up with this one, and I'd never heard of her. And I feel like I connect so much with her way of viewing the world. Now, it's easy to say that, but people change all the time. But I connect really well with this book at this moment in my life. And it's one of my favorite feelings. This is what I get so happy when I like discover a new writer, a new advocate, a new person, a new book or a movie. And some people might be like, how didn't you know about that? And I'm like, I don't know, but I love that feeling because I get excited knowing that there's so many more books and people and movies out there to read. And yeah, it just makes my soul really happy. So I'm gonna read out this. I just opened the page and this is underlined. I'm gonna read out a passage from Untamed by Glennon Doyle. Her daughter Tish asks her, or says to her mum that she doesn't want to disappoint someone, but she doesn't want to do this thing. And then the mum says, so don't do it. And Tish says, but I don't want to disappoint him. And the mum says, listen, every time you're given a choice between disappointing someone else and disappointing yourself, your duty is to disappoint that someone else. Your job throughout your entire life is to disappoint as many people as it takes to avoid disappointing yourself. The daughter says, even you? And the mum responds, especially me. Like, wow. I just feel like this book is just gives you permission to disappoint people and let people down. But I feel like we've been brought up to do the opposite, to say yes, especially as women, to, do it all, to say yes. We care a lot more about people liking us than about, yeah, people respecting us, I guess, and having our voice heard. Let's see, there might be one more. Like, there's so many good passages in this, so I just want to read one more, and then that will be it. Okay, so okay, I'll read the one about, she said, becoming sober. Revelation must come before revolution. Becoming sober from booze, patriarchy, white supremacy is a little bit like swallowing the blue pill and slowly watching the invisible, deliberate matrix we've been living inside of become visible. For me, the process of detoxing from booze included becoming aware of the matrix of consumer culture that brainwashed me into believing that my pain was to be numbed through consumption. Detoxing from my eating disorder meant seeing the web of patriarchy that trained me to believe that I was not allowed to be hungry or take up space on the earth. And detoxing from racism is requiring me to open my eyes to the elaborate web of white supremacy that exists to convince me that I am better than people of color. Yeah, I just really um loved reading this book, so I would highly recommend it. I'm aware that like there's a lot of books here and I'm not going to be able to give the same amount of time to all of them. So I'm gonna, as I said, focus on some of the ones that I found most impactful. Awareness by Anthony de Mello, like, oh my God, I'm gonna probably reread this loads. I loved it so much. It's a short book, but I feel like every line or a lot of lines were like hitting something in me. And it felt like someone was shaking me awake to like the ridiculousness of society and how and the ridiculousness of the way my brain works, and not in like a bad way, but just like a get over yourself, like stop trying to impress people, just do what you want to do. It was a different sort of one. Like I know Glennon Doyle's was really like disappoint people. This one's more just like be aware, notice. Um yeah, maybe I'll read a bit of my book report um on it, but first I'm going to read a passage. So okay. The person who is asleep always thinks he'll feel better if somebody else changes. You're suffering because you are asleep, but you're thinking, how wonderful life would be if somebody else would change. How wonderful life would be if my neighbor changed, my wife changed, my boss changed. We always want someone else to change so that we will feel good. But has it ever struck you that even if your wife changes or your husband changes, what does that do to you? You're just as vulnerable as before. You're just as idiotic as before. You're just as asleep as before. You are the one who needs to change, who needs to take medicine. You keep insisting, I feel good because the world is right. Wrong. The world is right because I feel good. That's what all the mystics are saying. Yeah, that's just yeah, that's just a glimpse into this book, and it's not that long. But I feel like he's very blunt in his writing, and it's kind of a lot of it about like being spiritually awake, being more aware, and like letting go of all the crap we worry about. And it really just makes you think, okay, life is not that complicated. I'm making it complicated. So I'm just going to read a paragraph from my book report. This book is a great reminder of how attached we all are to people, places, things, how we take credit for what things look like and for factors outside of who we are, like money in the bank, job title, possessions. The big question, who am I, is confronted by reminding us how the self is a concept influenced by society. It's ego driven based on fear. We are not our attachments, but we are our awareness. And reading this felt freeing as I find labels as well as past experiences can be confining. Okay, so just an idea of this is helping us question like what do we attach our sense of self to? And it's very freeing in a way, realizing like, okay, all we really have is our awareness and what we put our attention to. And we do have some control over that. Okay, so next book that I really loved was Bernardine Evaristo, Manifesto on Never Giving Up. I had the privilege to meet her at the Writers' Festival in Ubud. Was it 2 years ago? Um, and listen to her speak about this book. And I remember thinking, oh, I really want to read that. And I was in Lisbon earlier this year and I saw it in this like cute, it was a bookshop, but it was a pub. So it was more of like a pub, but they also had a bookshop in it. It was like perfect. You know, you could just read a book there and have a drink. So I bought it and I read it while I was there. Um, even though I think I brought a different book over with me, but I ended up buying this one and reading it. And I guess since I've read a lot of different books about writing this year and books about breathwork related or related to the nervous system and spirituality because they're all things that I'm interested in, that I'm working in those fields. So I suppose this book, it's a memoir, so we get a glimpse into her life growing up and the different obstacles she faced and her never-ending pursuit to be a published writer, but all the different cool things she did on the way there. And she's really honest and open. And, like also was quite blunt in how, she was saying, you're kidding yourself if you think it's just something easy. Like I remember she talked about having to edit one of her books loads and she thought, that it would be great, but a lot of the real work comes in the editing. And that was kind of a like, once again, it shook me awake because I had been complaining about how I'd written things and I was like, oh, the effort of editing all of them. But it was a reminder of like, it's the hard work, the editing, but that can make the difference between something being good and something being really good and being to a publishable standard. And that helped me reading it because it was a reminder of like, okay, good things take time and there's no point complaining. It's a part of it. I think it's just sometimes we see like these overnight successes or Stephen King talks about writing a book in a weekend. But I loved how she talked about like living broke and living creatively and also like, yeah, just getting really involved in her community and what it was like growing up um, with two different parents who were different races and how her family treated her differently, different family members and different people because of that. Um, yeah, and I just found it really cool and I found her really inspirational. So I'm going to see, is there a passage I've underlined that I can read out? No, I don't think there is. I think maybe I just wasn't underlining and maybe I was reading. So anyway, Bernardine Evaristo, Manifesto and Never Given Up. I highly recommend. Okay, I found a passage that I, yeah, I found a passage. Okay. I learned that no two people are the same, and it was a lack of imagination to create them as such. All fictional characters need to be individuals. That the division of characters into goodies and baddies is a childish approach that should remain consigned to old-fashioned fairy tales. Human beings of all races, genders, and sexualities are complex and contradictory and capable of oppressing others, whether at governmental, communal, or personal level. And we are all capable of morally questionable behavior. So I loved that. I loved like her honesty about that, of like the complexity of humans. And she was really open as well about her sexuality drifting in between different genders. And yeah, I really admire once again, no more than what Glenn and Doyle, when people are really open and honest and admit that like humans are complex and don't always see life just in a like black and white sort of way, but like are open to just floating between different things. Yeah, so I really loved her memoir and I would like to read more of her writing, and because I just really enjoyed her style of writing and storytelling too. Um, okay, so fiction wise, because I've mostly named out non-fiction so far, um, I loved The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Oh, I feel like he's such a ray of sunshine. I just love like going onto his social media page and seeing some of his posts and how like open, once again, open and honest and real he is. And he's just like, whatever, who cares? Like, if you accept me or not, but this is what I think and this is the truth. And I appreciate and admire people speaking out and reflecting what they see back to the world and to society. But also, like, you can just tell, he has this ability to make life and the world and the bad make beauty out of it. And I liked this story. And it was so weird. I found this book again in the little library thing. What's it called? Where you leave a book and you take a book. I found a few actually there. Um, this is one. I'm gonna coming up to Christmas now. I'm gonna have to go and drop a load of books down, to because I've just found some great ones down there when I was on my walks or my swims. So the Midnight Library, yeah, I started reading this after my cat Shibby had just died and I was heartbroken. And I will do like a year review of 2025 on another podcast near the new year, because we've still got time. But this book, it opens, what was funny about it was that it opens with a cat. I don't know, I don't want to give a spoiler, but I don't think it is much of a spoiler, but anyway, it opens with a cat. That's all I'll say. And I didn't expect it. And I started reading this like a day or so after Shibby died. And then it just felt like it found me at the right time. And I loved the idea of this book. It's that like the main character is not happy with her life and she gets a chance to visit alternate lives that she could have lived. So let's say when you think back to being a kid and you're like, oh, what could I have done? You might have, oh, if I could go back in time, I would have done this differently. And so she gets a chance to revisit all the different ways her life could have turned out if she did a different thing. But in doing that, you see how another area of your life is impacted. So, for example, as a kid, I wanted to be a pop star. Let's say I go back and that actually ends up coming true, that dream, but I don't have some of the close friendships I now have. I'm not as close with my parents. Something else, something awful might have happened. And some good things, but it's like that whole idea of like you go to each of them and you see that there's always a good and a bad, a pro and a con, because we always romanticize, oh, well, if I lived here, things would be fine. If this never happened, but I love this book that explores all the different ways. And I won't give a spoiler away, but it's just really beautiful. And yeah, especially if you're in a rut too, I think it can help you just see things differently because it's so easy to compare our lives to other people's, especially nowadays with the online world. So that's just a book full of hope and beauty that I'd really recommend. And it's uplifting, but it's honest and real too. And I really enjoyed that. Some other novels is Geek Girl. Um, So I'm still reading this actually, but I watched the series on Netflix and I loved it. It's such a like teen, this is like a teenage book. And it was really funny because I was in London recently. I was in London for a poetry reading where I read my poem. I thought I had the book, but my poem was in. It's in Washing Windows 5. Um, I don't have it with me to show the camera, but Washing Windows 5 poetry book. I had a poem published. So this is relevant to Geek Girl, by the way. I was over in London because I was invited there to read my poem and for an event. And then the next day, I was feeling really like stunned. Like I nearly had stage fright. I think there was like a spotlight in my face. And because I wasn't like drinking or anything, I just realized I was like very overwhelmed. It was like I was having an out of body experience. But I think it was because I cared so much about it and it was such a big deal being over in London reading it on stage, that I just felt like afterwards I was exhausted and I was like, did that really happen? But I think I've become aware of how sensitive I am. Um, and I was trying to talk to people after and I had to leave. But anyway, the next day I was like, oh, once again, book therapy. I was like, "Do you know what? I'd love to just buy a nice book that makes me feel better about myself." And I just thought, I loved that show, Geek Girl. Why don't I buy that book? Like, that's the type of thing I want to read now. She's really quirky. She also gets overwhelmed, sensitive. I think, like, she's actually autistic, but the author didn't even realize that at the time. But loads of fans were writing in saying, like, that she's definitely neurodiverse. So, anyway, I can relate to lots of elements of this character. And I just was like, "Do you know what, that'd be a lovely book to get today. It'd make me feel a bit better about myself, reading about someone else feeling a bit weird and like a misfit in the world. And that she like struggles in some big settings. But anyway, it was funny because I went into a bookshop in London and I was like, "Oh, do you have Geek Girl?" And she was just, the lady was like, "No, we don't actually. But is there another, is there a particular type of book you're looking for?" And I was like, well, yeah, Geek Girl. And she's like, "Oh, well, we don't have that. Is there another type? Maybe we can find something similar." And I was like, "Oh, well, I'm just kind of looking for something to make myself feel better, something I can relate to." And she was like, "Okay, give me more ideas." And I was like, hmm, something easygoing about a girl who's maybe a bit quirky, a bit of a misfit. Um, Single. I started then, and she was just like, okay. And I was anything else. And then I was like, felt like I was nearly just describing myself as like someone who wants to be a writer, but is struggling, is facing rejection. I was just getting to a point where I was like, what even is this? I just want to read the book Geek Girl. And I was like, potentially neurodiverse. I don't know. And she was just like, okay, I'm not sure what book might fit that. And I was like, yeah, it's because I just want this one. So I went to another bookshop anyway. Actually, that's not true. I bought a book there called about writing. I forgot to add that to the list. One that I'm like, I kind of panicked and I just bought a book off them because then she suggested this book on writing. And it was one that looked nice, but my book therapy was out of hand that day. I came home with three books in my case. And I went over there with one book and I was only there for one night. But anyway, I got Geek Girl and I've started reading it and I really like it. And I love I do sometimes like kind of teenage style books or even when watching movies, I love like coming of age shows. Never Have I Ever was like a teen show I loved. Even Gossip Girl. Ones especially more like Never Have I Ever or even Geek Girl, where like the main character, you're kind of rooting for them because they're like imperfect, but they're also themselves, and they're like sometimes embarrassing. So anyway, I've been reading some of Geek Girl too, and I'm really enjoying it. It's like a comforting one. Another novel, which is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, which I would say a lot of people know because it is a global number one bestseller. And there are, I'm getting near the end, there's like 300, no, there's 400 pages, and I'm nearly Yeah, I'm 250 in, so I still have a bit to go, but I will finish it soon. But I've been tipping away at it for the last month or so, maybe longer. But I do. I really like the characters in it. There's two brothers, and I think she does a really good job at showing the world through their eyes. And I think she's got really beautiful ways of showing the world through their eyes. And there's really beautiful philosophical moment, and the writing is just amazing. Um, I don't feel like I'm like hooked, that I'm like, oh, I have to see what happens next. But I just feel like when I open it and read it, I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm safe in the character's presence. I don't feel like the plot, I'm like, oh, I need to know what happens, but I feel really like comforted when I'm reading from the brother's point of view, and it feels like real and it feels right. And that's a lovely feeling. And I have moments where I'm like, oh, um, but it's one that it took me a little bit of time because I feel like it's a slow pace. It's nice. Yeah, as I said, it's a beautiful way of seeing the world, and it jumps between two brothers' perspective of the world. And I think they're both depicted, it's done really well because they're both so different. And yeah, you can feel like there's love there, but it's capturing how there can be love between brothers or between men, but they don't know how to show it or say it. And it captures how their outside conversations with other women, the difference between that and their relationship. And I think that's really nice. Yeah, so I haven't gotten to the end, so I can't give the full review, but it is one that I would recommend too. Um, and they're all just so different. I'm not aware of how long this like podcast has went on for so far. So I'm going to try to chat a bit more about the others. Okay, here are my some of my quick reads, in that ones that I read really fast that would be like the binge watch guilty pleasure type reads, but not ones that like changed my life. Um so they were nice escapes, that's how I'd put it. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was a really my friend actually posted this to me, and it was one I read during the storm, and I think I read it in a day. It was just one that I was really engaged with the plot, and I enjoyed it a lot reading it. And I wanted to keep reading it. So it's one that's really, yeah, that I enjoyed the plot a lot, and it was a page turner that I couldn't put down, and I would really recommend it. It was enjoyable, it was easy to read. Verity by Colleen Hoover. I don't actually know how I ended up with this. I think it might have been one I took from the book cupboard again down by the pool. The pool, sorry, the book cubby down by the sea where I do my walks. Um, this was one that I couldn't put down, but it actually freaked me out a lot. Parts of it were disturbing, and I was having weird nightmares. And I'm not going to blame the book for it, but I don't think the book helped. Yeah, I would say it's more of a thriller. I think it's different from her usual way of writing, but I do like her style of writing. I find it easy to read and easy to get lost in. So, like I was like to mom, oh, I think you'd like this. Because it is one that you're like, oh, what's going to happen? And there's a lot of like, it's like putting pieces of a puzzle together. And I did enjoy that part of it. I was like, oh, I just want to know what happens. But like that, once you finish it, I didn't really think about it much again. But it's a nice one to escape in. A holiday read. And there's another one, I'm just getting my list now, by Colleen Hoover, Heartbones, which to be fair, I started reading it when I was on a dog set, and I got like halfway through it, and I really liked it, and I was finding like the narrator quite relatable, and I was getting all excited for her romance. It's like a romance novel, and her mother dies at the start. So there's a lot of like secrecy, and the plot is intriguing, and it's an easy one to read. Now, I haven't finished it because I went listening to it on audiobook, and it just isn't the same. I think I need to like pick up the book and read the second half, but it's not one that like I was bothered. I was bothered when I left, and I was like, oh, why didn't I finish it when I was on my dog set? But life goes on. Um, but it's one that I would like to read the end of, or I'll just have to listen to it. But they're just kind of easy read ones, and Another one, what other easy read ones did I have? I'm not sure if I had many other easy read ones, but I definitely had more intense ones. I had this one actually. I picked it up, another book therapy one. Picked it up in a train station at the start of this year on New Year's Day. And it's called Sensitive, and there's a cat on the front. So, yeah, you can see overlapping themes from this year. And it just helped me feel seen. I enjoyed it. I think they like summed up well what like and talked about different common traits of sensitive people. They had interviews. I know they used a passage about Bruce Springsteen, different celebrities, people who might feel sensitive, and focused on like the good qualities of feeling sensitive, the creative sides, the yeah. And I think it helped me because I was feeling sensitive on the day. And I know I've become even more aware this year of how sensitive I am. I've always known it, but I think this year more than ever, when like I stopped drinking for a long period, and I was also doing more breath work and body work. I just had so many different emotions and feelings inside of me that I find art and podcasting and yeah, I suppose writing as great ways to like express it, but it can feel like isolating when you're feeling so much and maybe people around you aren't able to hold space for that or can't relate to it. So it's lovely. Like I did enjoy reading this book. It's not like one of my favorite books. I've read other ones to do with being sensitive. Um, yeah, or listen to different podcasts and things that have maybe been went even more into depth. I can't think of them off the top of my head now, but yeah, it was a nice one for the time. Um, okay, and now I'm gonna list out some of the books for my breathwork course. So, oh wait, actually, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Absolutely love that book. It's all about the creative process. So you can tell the difference in how I talk about this book to the other one I was just on about. And of course, I think reading is so subjective too. So some people I've had be like, "What? You didn't like this?" And I love this, but we're all different. So Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Oh my God, I loved it. I listened to it on an audiobook once and I just loved listening to it and drinking my coffee in the morning. And then I listened to it again later in the year, in the second half of the year, and it's kind of all about like not taking the creative process so seriously. It's all about writing, creativity, how it can be like a spiritual thing. And yeah, I just loved the way she talks about it and describes it as magical. And I just feel like it was a great influence for me with my creative writing workshops that I was hosting this year. Also, there's a book for writing that was recommended to me, Bird by Bird, which I didn't love as much as Big Magic, but it was helpful. Um, Once again, it was like hearing about someone's struggles with writing and about all the imposter syndrome that we can experience. And it was another book kind of just giving me permission to feel all the like self-doubt that comes up with writing and publishing. Another creative book that I bought and read was by Rick Rubin, and this is probably the most expensive book I paid for this year. I got other books out of the library. This one, The Creative Act Way of Being, I feel like it had so many sentences that I underlined, and I was like, wow, that's such a nice way of looking at it. I didn't feel like I loved the voice in the book in that I felt like he was this distant sort of mystical voice, just kind of saying as it is, and this is the creative way, rather than let's say with Elizabeth Gilbert's book, it's more like nearly like a memoir and you feel like it's her talking to you and it's personal and from the heart. This felt nearly like mystical and distant in a way, which I think he said he wanted to capture that that's the way the creative process can be. So it was fitting. And I did enjoy like underlining different lines. I've went back since and used them. I was like, oh, that's a great way to put it. But it wasn't like as I was reading it that I was just like, oh my God, this makes me love writing so much, which is how I felt reading like Big Magic or when I read Bernardine Evaristo's memoir or Glennon Doyle's book. I was just like, yes. But this one, it had parts that I was just like, yeah, that's so true. So I'll read out a passage. Most people aren't interested in being told what to think or feel. Great art is created through freedom of self-expression and received with freedom of individual interpretation. Great art opens a conversation rather than closing it, and often this conversation is started by accident. Those of us choosing to live as artists embrace our filter as a gift. To reject it would be tragic. So he had a lot of good lines. Okay, this was actually probably one of my favorite ones. I remember taking a picture of this and posting it online. And actually, my cousin said that me and another guy she follows put up the exact same picture, the exact same passage from the exact same book on the same day. And she was like, "What?" She clicked between our stories. I forget. I don't know, was it this or it was a different line, but that was weird, but also a sign. I felt like that was a spiritual sign of you're on the right path. This book was meant for you. Um, okay, here's another passage from this book. Beginner's mind is starting from a pure childlike place of not knowing, living in the moment with as few fixed beliefs as possible. Any preconceived ideas and accepted conventions limit what's possible. So I love the idea of the beginner's mind, and it's like what I encourage in creative workshops. It's like when you go at something like you're a beginner, you allow yourself to make mistakes. You're not going at it being like, oh, I have to be good, I have to know what I'm doing. It gives you more room to play. And I do feel like Rick Rubin, like I've listened to him, and I think this could be an interesting one to listen on audiobook. I've quite liked listening to his interviews and the way he talks about art. And I thought he had a lot of good points. It's just sometimes it felt really like sentence, sentence, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. It didn't feel like it was all flowy and from the heart, but maybe I'll look back on it again at another point and feel differently. But I'm happy, like there was a lot of lines that really helped and just reminders of certain things that I already felt and knew myself. So um, yeah, I think all of the books around me right now, I've kind of chatted about them for those watching on camera. I'm going to end by talking about a few books from my breathwork course, and then we'll wrap it up because this could be one of the longest podcasts I've done. Okay, so books from my breathwork course. Oh, no, actually, first I want to talk about a book I'm reading and listening to an audiobook at the moment that um I love. Brian Keane, Rewire Your Mindset. It's just really motivational. It's a great, like, and I'm listening to this now at the end of the year because it's really like, I'm like, I need to get motivated. I need to get self-disciplined. I'm building a women's online creative community. This is really making me believe that I can do anything. So that's Rewire Your Mindset by Brian Keane. I'm nearly finished it. I've been listening to him and I'm like, I'm probably going to replay this audiobook again next month because there's just some people who, when they speak, it's very inspirational and it might not be the same if you're reading the book. So that's why I think some audiobooks can be great and books can be better listened to than read. And of course, it's great if you have both. And I would nearly like to have his, and I might, buy the actual book and underline parts because he has some real nuggets of golden wisdom. Okay, and then this is the second time I tried to talk about books from my breathwork course and I got distracted. Okay, The Body Keeps the Score. Oh my God. If you haven't read that book or heard of it, read it. It's but it's really heavy and a lot and it's a long book. So it really changed the way that I viewed a lot of things, but something that stuck out to me was this idea that like it's all about how a lot of our past pains can live in the body and in the nervous system. So like working from the mind can only help us so much. And it helped me understand like why people self-sabotage, especially if you look at people who are sexually abused. Like it talks about how there are people who are sexually abused when they're young and somehow they keep ending up in situations where this happens again. And the idea is that our nervous system goes with what's familiar, with what's already known, and we keep attracting the same situations because that's what we believe is our familiar life. And sometimes there's so much shame and lack of self-worth there that we believe that we deserve that. It's really sad, and there's a lot of research in there And he talks about how like some of the research that he's developed, the APA Association denied it, and he nearly shares how it's like sometimes it's the idea that like science don't want to listen to the holistic approach because a lot of companies won't profit off of that, medicine, pharmaceutical companies profit when we put all of our pain when we look for tablets and pills to sort out our depression and our trauma rather than looking at also holistic and body approaches. I remember there was an example of how there was a girl um, in the book, and they talked about one girl in particular. She was lashing out when people came near her, grew up in an abusive household, wasn't able to be near people. But when she was left to look after a horse, an animal, she completely changed. And her nervous system was like regulating being around an animal, taking care of something, and being, left with animals. They talked about how some people, it's actually just safer for them to be around animals, to be in nature, than to be around others. Because we sometimes we're like, what's wrong with them? Why are they being like this? But if your body has only known threatening environments when you're younger, then you're going to continue living in that threatening state. And yeah, it's not going to feel safe, and we act out in different ways when we don't feel safe. And so this girl's whole life changed around. She eventually then did become more social, went to college, all from looking after horses. And it was talking about different therapeutic modalities. It talked about art, creativity, also breath work. Yeah, modalities that aren't just the norm ones of like talk therapy or medication. Another thing that stuck with me was how like some people who have been like sexually abused, um, then that was a big theme in it, especially kids. It was so sad how high the statistics were. Um, how sometimes then what they'll do is there's a high correlation with becoming overweight, and it's nearly like you do that as a protective mechanism then, and it's like that whole idea of the body turning against itself also to keep safe. It's like you make yourself invisible, or you find different ways to keep ourselves safe, but like it's learning to go deeper than the nervous system. But the whole book talks about how our body remembers, and we have to look at the body. It's not just about looking at the mind. Another book that was really confronting was Gabor Mate's When the Body Says No. And the idea that also, Jesus, that changed a lot when I read that. It was very confronting because I could relate. Talks about how if we're chronic people pleasers saying yes to everyone except ourselves, there's high correlations with autoimmune disorders, high correlations with different diseases and certain cancers from people who are repressing their own needs and, being good by helping everyone else accept themselves. And they say no to, they don't say no, and they take on more, and they could be workaholics. But it talked about how the consequence of not saying no is that our body starts to say no for us. And that was just, Jesus, it once again, it's nearly a permission slip reminding you to like look after yourself, look after your own needs first. So all of that was very eye-opening because, as I said, I've realized I'm quite a sensitive person, and sometimes I'll do things because I want to maintain relationships. And keep the peace. I want to help out. But sometimes it's like your nervous system when I can feel overwhelmed at times. And this was a wake-up call of like, start saying no when you're really tired. Don't go to things if it doesn't feel right, because at the end of the day, like, your health is what, if you're constantly doing and going and just pleasing others, that can really impact your health. So yeah, they're really eye-opening books. You can get them on audiobook, or I got them from the library. Ones that I'd recommend, that they delve deep into the mind-body connection and the impact and the consequences of like the body, I guess, holding different trauma and tension, and how our body can hold these things. And through tools like breath work, dance, somatics, movement, um, choosing to say no. there are other ways that we can then learn to feel safe again in our environment, being around horses. Yeah, so look, I feel like I've kind of blabbered on about a load of books. But thank you all for listening today. There's some other books on the list that I didn't even get to, but I think those are kind of all the different ones that I had a lot to say about. Yeah, if you have any questions or you want to share some books that you read or listened to this year, please do message me at a good kind of scary on Instagram, wherever you get your podcasts. Yeah, here are some of my books if you're watching on YouTube. It's a big load of books this year. But if you're wondering like how do you do that? How do you read so much? Um getting up and doing like 10 minutes in the morning, game changer. Might not seem like a lot, but if you read like 10 pages, that is 300 pages in 1 month, which could be 2 books. Listening to, and then 2 by 12 is 24. Listening to audiobooks in the car or on my walks. And there are other ways that you could do it, but just and it's okay if you miss days, but I made it a part of my routine to read a bit in the morning, even if it's a few pages. And then if you're really enjoying it, you'll often read more. And there's days where you probably won't want to read. Okay, that's all from me. Hope that ye all have a lovely day. Thank you all for listening. Bye bye, till next time.